your hands together, ladies and gentlemen, Dan Maxwell.
Good evening, everyone. I'll start with a confession. I am surprised to find myself here. Despite all that is going on in the world and how strongly it makes me feel, I have tried to avoid making foreign affairs and issues adjacent to them part of my work as a counsellor. In fact, during my campaign, when I would be constantly hounded with questions about my position on the conflict in the Middle East, I would say that I'll announce my position on that when Benjamin Netanyahu lets me know his plan for getting the bins picked up in Sydney on time. That was perhaps naive though, because when people in the communities I represent are targeted for who they are, or for conflicts they may have nothing to do with, I cannot look away. My concern is for social cohesion in Sydney. One of the reasons I came here is because I want to listen and to learn, to hear different perspectives on how to be an effective ally to our Jewish community and build social cohesion. If we aren't willing to stand up and stand with our fellow Australians when they are targeted for who they are, then our hard-fought principles become nothing more than empty slogans. A Jewish bakery in Darlinghurst called Avner's, run by Ed Helmagi and his family, has been targeted with anti-Semitic abuse for years now, since October 7. Hamas symbolism spray painted on the windows, threatening notes left under the door, "Be careful." Ed put it very well and showed great restraint when he said, "I'm proudly Jewish, but I'm also Australian. I'm not Israeli. If you've got a problem with Israeli politics or military policy, there's a very good way to deal with that. You go to the Israeli consul. If you're coming after me, it's not an Israel problem, it's a Jewish problem. And we have a word for that, and it's antisemitism." I went to see Ed a few days ago, and he told me that recently things have actually been going quite well in that regard. The shop has gone a whole 4 days, he said, without an incident. But in the few days since I saw him, it has been targeted again. So this is why I'm here today, because when people in my city are targeted like this, I have a duty to stand with them. It's clear to me, as it is to most Australians, that the rise in harassment, vilification and violence against Jewish Australians is unacceptable. It is urgent that we address it as individuals and as a society. Much of this rise is attributed to the conflict in the Middle East, often done with an intention to explain, though sometimes coming from a place that seeks to excuse. Neither is appropriate. Whatever your views about the Netanyahu government or about Palestine, anti-Semitism is racism, and like all racism, responsibility rests with the perpetrators. It is unjustifiable, it is always categorically wrong. But when anti-Semitism is discussed here only in the context of events 14,000 kilometres away, some, especially on the left, treat it as less urgent, as if when hostilities abroad end, hostility here will dissolve. That is not how hatred works. Left unaddressed, hatred accumulates, and its impact accumulates too. You can clean graffiti, well done Rashida, you can rebuild a synagogue, but you can't unhave a conversation with a child about why they are more unsafe because they're Jewish. You can't unhear the silence of friends who looked away. All of this has an impact. And in an egalitarian society like Australia, having to make the case for your own dignity is an indignity in itself. That principle should compel us all to stand with the Jewish community, as we ought with any community as Australians together. That is why I'm here. Now, I said I came to listen and to learn, which is what I've been doing, and I also want to make 3 points. Points I believe must be said at a forum like this. But before I do, I also want to address that elephant that's in the room. This conference has attracted some controversy. Many of us, including me, have come under significant pressure not to be here. There have been accusations that, far from being a good faith effort to combat anti-Semitism, that this conference is really about pushing an Israeli agenda, silencing criticism of that government, and undermining solidarity with Palestinian civilians. So let's look at that squarely in the face as I make these 3 points. The first point, we must fight anti-Semitism consistently wherever it appears. Anyone can recognise anti-Semitism in an adversary. Far fewer are willing to call it out in a friend. I read David Baddiel's book, Jews Don't Count, this week. He argues anti-Semitism is often treated differently to other racisms. In progressive spaces in particular, it can be rationalised away as punching up in the hierarchy of privilege or as an inevitable byproduct of anger at Israel. That is not good enough. Progressives cannot excuse anti-Semitism without betraying the very values that they claim to defend. Yes, anti-Semitism has also emerged in conservative spaces through dog whistles, conspiracy theories, and the familiar marching in the street that we've seen recently. If we call out anti-Semitism in one camp but overlook it in another because the offenders are useful to us, then we undermine our credibility. And without credibility, well-meaning people will stop listening to us on the left, especially when we need to be a critical friend. And then there's Mark Latham. Just last week, he told the Jewish community to grow up, arguing that because some attacks have been linked to organised crime and even Iran, that there's no serious, homegrown anti-Semitic ideology in Sydney, as if we should all take comfort from the fact that hate has been orchestrated by a foreign power. Thank God. He questioned how many of the incidents were serious and how many were low level, and even compared it to his own experience, saying that he's endured hundreds of attacks but doesn't invent something called anti-Lathamism. Now, speaking of building common ground, anti-Lathamism might be somewhere that we can start. Anti-Semitism does not belong to one political tribe. Neither does the responsibility to confront it. The minute we treat it as if it does, we weaken the cause and betray those we're meant to protect. The second point that I want to make is that if we are serious about social cohesion, we must be disciplined about alliances of convenience, who we let into this movement. It is very hard to take talk of cohesion seriously from anyone associated with Advance Australia, a group that has spent years vilifying minorities and sowing division. And it is difficult to see figures here who have publicly targeted other Australians, especially Muslims, for who they are. I want you to know that while I ultimately chose to come, these elements have made it difficult. They do not speak for me, and I hope they do not overshadow the core concern at the heart of this event, anti-Semitism in our communities. I say the same about the Harbour Bridge March, where extremists waving banners or portraits of the Ayatollah did not discredit genuine humanitarian concern for civilians in Gaza that motivated so many, including me, to attend. So yes, I'm here, but I want you to hear me. It was not easy, and I know allies who might have been here who chose to stay away. If we welcome people into this movement simply because they are strong on anti-Semitism while they are weak or hostile on other forms of prejudice, we make it very difficult for others to stay in the tent. Racism must be called out in all its forms. That's what solidarity means. And that solidarity is so necessary right now. We've seen it recently in Melbourne, when neo-Nazis targeted Indian Australians in particular and attacked a First Nations protest site at Camp Sovereignty, leaving some hospitalised. They also attacked a Jew. When hatred is bold enough to march unmasked in broad daylight, it shows we have ignored those pulling at the loose threads of our cohesion for too long. Multiculturalism is the fabric that binds us together, And right now, we need all hands holding it together in solidarity. And solidarity is not just moral, it is strategic. Admitting racists narrows the coalition. Some come in, but more turn away. And it risks cornering concern for anti-Semitism into a partisan issue. Once tied to partisan wins, success becomes fragile, hostage to the politics of the moment. That is something we as leaders cannot afford. It is something our Jewish friends and neighbours cannot afford, and it is something our country cannot afford. The third point that I want to make is that anti-Semitism, as Gillian Siegel said, must never be used to shield the Israeli government from legitimate criticism, and nor should criticism of Israel ever be used to excuse or diminish anti-Semitism. Both are wrong. It should not be difficult to reconcile these ideas. There's a time when they were firm common ground, but I worry about the growing distance between people of good faith who are being cornered by hardliners into holding only one of these positions closer than the other. It needs to be both. It's true that you cannot comprehensively address anti-Semitism without acknowledging where it intersects with illegitimate criticism of Israel, yes. But also, you cannot address it without the support of those who are deeply critical of Israel's policies and conduct. Closing hearts and minds to otherwise receptive allies only hands allyship over to those with no genuine interest in solving the problem, but in continuing to exploit it. Take me, for example. I stand here with you as a friend, but also as someone who marched across the bridge because I oppose the horror the Netanyahu government is inflicting on Palestinian civilians. The scale of the humanitarian crisis is an atrocity. I condemn it, and it must end. I say that, and in the same breath, I say anti-Semitism is racism and is always wrong. If views like these disqualify someone from allyship, then it is no longer just a conversation about anti-Semitism. Valid criticism of the government of Israel must never be a barrier to being part of this fight. Excluding those voices shrinks the coalition we need. So friends, I began with Ed's Bakery because the heart of this is human. Jewish Australians deserve to live with safety, with dignity, and with the confidence that their neighbours will stand with them when it counts. A principled, disciplined, and inclusive fight against anti-Semitism is how we win. A fight that names anti-Semitism for what it is, a fight that doesn't back down when it gets politically inconvenient, a fight that welcomes legitimate criticism of this government of Israel, a fight that builds solidarity by excluding those who sow division, a fight that confronts anti-Semitism wherever we find it, and above all, a fight that holds fast to the equality of all Australians, Jewish, First Nations, Chinese, Muslim, Arab, and beyond. If we hold that line, we will not only defeat anti-Semitism, we will strengthen the very fabric of our shared society. That is the coalition worth building. That is the coalition that can last. That is the coalition I am committed to. Thank you.